Welcome back to class, everybody. It's a bloody sandy day in the neighborhood, and today we are talking about axes. Oh, nasty bits of work. So I hope you all are getting ready for some serious Viking feels. Alright, we're going to start with what I got over here. Actually, you know what? We're going to start with a table, then we'll go here, then we'll go there, then we'll go to what I got on me. First axes up are these two. The Francesca and the classic throwing axe. So this was more commonly a throwing axe design when throwing axes became more common. This was their semi-origin design by the Iberians, again meant to skip, while this one was more or less meant to just hit and hook into whatever it hit, hence the curve of its body. It was meant to sink into a shield, sink into a person, kind of weigh them down or wound them, while the Francesca's quick little up tip here meant when it hit, it could skip and keep going, go under a shield and come back up. So those are some real beautiful things. I feel a little bad in my spears episode and my dagger episode, lay down, that I didn't go into the throwing versions of those weapons, so I'm going to make sure to cover that today. I'm going to do my own episode just on throwing weapons. We'll get to that eventually. Over here we've got the horseman's axe and the bearded great axe. First up with the horseman's axe. This is a beautiful full metal body with a spike for armor negation and a chopping end to take off limbs and heads. Not the widest blade, not the largest blade, but definitely large enough to, get that job done. And the spike on the other end meant that if the horseman just, spun it around in their hand like that, they could drive that tip into a armor plate wearing opponent. Now, nothing to really jab with here on the top, but that's all right, because a horseman's not going to be stabbing with this. They're going to be hitting like this against when they're stationary, or when they're moving, coming down with that smaller blade and just taking limbs off, taking heads off, denting plate. Next up is the bearded great axe. Now, an axe like this, and I'm going to float you for a second. Something like this was more or less an aesthetical design or a burial weapon than actually used in combat. Oh, no, just stop. Okay. The reason being all the ornate patternings, plus double-sided axes like this, they were a risk to you or anyone behind you when you brought the axe back to bring it back down. Plus, the shaft of this weapon isn't in any way banded, so if you try to block with it, they're going to just crack it right in half. Plus the heads are a little small for like an actual weapon. I could definitely see this being a burial weapon or an ornate like piece that you'd hang in your mead hall here. Whoa, it's trippy though. I'm gonna put you back. I'm not gonna send you to Brazil. Next, we're gonna go over here to some longer axes. These are polearm variants. This is the Raunch, an absolute favorite of mine. It's every bit of death wrapped into one. So you've got spikes on the back for the back hits, spear top for sticking to the ground, two wings here to catch blades and opponents, this dent here that goes into two sweeping bells. I believe I had this one on the show earlier when I did thrusting weapons, because it's just so beautiful. This is why I'm in love with the phrase nasty bit of work, because that's all this is just nasty, a big old misshapen ball of nasty. Next up is the English bill, an improvement on the forest bill, which I have hanging up over there. A wider little axe blade with that swoop, allowing it to take off arms. A sturdy head here, as well as this sharpened V that would pinch the flesh, catch weapons. A back spike here. Now you can tell just by looking at this, this was not a weapon of like the nobility. This was not a weapon of knights. This was a weapon given to a poor soldier from a hammered out piece of steel. Real cheap, on a real cheap piece of lumber. Easy to make 30 of these in a day, probably. These things were just cranked out and given to foot soldiers so that they actually stood a chance on the battlefield. Oftentimes wielded with a small sidearm. Moving on over here, we've got our Templar axe, been on the show before when we did slicing weapons, for its beautiful curves that came down. We've got the, I'm pretty sure this is just a war axe. the Orleans battle axe. Got this back spike here and a top spike so you can thrust with it or pick with it. A nice wide blade and this full metal body here to block any kind of incoming strike. See, axes are not a defensive weapon. These are offensive, most notably wielded with a shield. But when you've got a full metal shaft like this, you could block a sword, it'd get caught here, all right, and you could whip it down, come back with that spike. This axe here might be one of my favorite designed axes, easily, for its incredible versatility. Next, we've got the forest bill, that good inverse curve, no stabbing. This back's normally flat. That would allow it to hack off limbs. Originally limbs of trees, later limbs of people, hence the name the forest bill. It was a bit of agricultural tool that later became a weapon of war by the poor people. Like in our last episode, when I whipped out the pitchfork and the trident, poor person's weapon. Next is the Gothic axe. This was often used by later Germanics against plate mail and chain mail. Yep, the Gothic axe from the Gothic era. These dents here on the back could dent plate mail to deliver concussive force, or this large blade here to hack off limbs, hack off heads, do whatever you got to do. And a tiny spike here, probably not really going to be able to stab with that because the axe blade itself seems to hit first. More of an aesthetic choice, but you know what? I'm digging it. Next up here is the halberd. All right. Yep, the crescent halberd. So the inverse curve of its axe blade instead of an outward curve lends to that same thing with the forest bill and some of the other axes, to that chop. See, this halberd has the outward blade going on. Has this little spike coming off the back that's very wide, meaning that it is almost impossible for this spike to get stuck in the armor. A spike like this could get stuck in the armor. Spikes like this guy, you know, if you embed it in the armor, it might get stuck there. A wide-ass spike like this may not have the same penetration power, but it also means it ain't going to get stuck. Great spear tip. Absolute great spear tip looking at that. Definitely going to be able to hold off an advancing army with something like that. Now, halberds were invented when they wanted to take a poleaxe and other polearms and spears and make it into one weapon, essentially giving a spearman way more choice on the battlefield. And we'll get into that in a little bit. Next up is the Norse axe. Now, the Vikings and other Norse people, they did not have a lot of iron to work with when they wanted to go on their raids. So they needed to make what little iron they had work. The spjot in our last episode, here's a photo. Thank you, Jake. Those were used with as little metal as possible. That way they didn't have to they weren't very expensive. They were very cheap. As you can tell by this Norse axe, not a lot of metal here given it its weight, but all of its weight is because it's at the end of quite the long handle. That gives it its freaking, oh, that bit right in. See, that gives it its leverage right there. Able to bite right into that wood. Oh, you push it in a little. So yeah, it does have this little chip back here, maybe for like dent in a shield or whatever, but I'd ride that off over favor of this axe blade. Last on the list is a bearded axe, a great bearded axe, I think. Nope, just regular bearded axe. Heavy blade. Now the reason it's called bearded is because this front dips down like that. You can see here another bearded axe, the northern axe. This one's in the base game actually. And I loved its look and design, especially with that curve. That curve was so that they could hang it on a shield, hang it on the side of a boat, just hang it on whatever they wanted to hang it on. Even slip it into their belt. The belt loop will catch on that, and it'll just hang there on your hip. And when they whip these things out on the battlefield, they could get that loop over and hook an opponent's shield, pull it down, and then drive forward with that blunt end, smack them in the nose, wind up, get that good chop in there. Axes were just nasty weapons. The smarter you were about using an axe, the longer you were going to stay alive. I would, and this is a weird thing to say, I would prefer an axe over a sword. Probably 6 out of 10. So 2 out of 5 times. or no, I don't, 3 out of 5 times. So 3 out of 5 times I'd rather have an axe than a sword, depending on what I'm going up against, because axes you can be a lot smarter with, but they also require less skill to wield. A sword requires a lot of skill to use properly. An axe just requires you to hit with the end of it, not with the blade. There's a lot less techniques one can do with an axe, therefore axes are easier to master. Now this is a bearded axe just like that on a lot longer handle, allowing this weighted head to have a lot more wump when you bring it down on the opponent. And that wide blade here is definitely going to cleave. It's going to take off heads, it's going to take off legs, it's going to take off arms, it's going to turn a man into 2 men. All right. Last up here, we've got our Swiss Volge. All right, it has a decent blade here, beautiful cross ordainings to show that it's from the Gothic era, just like our Gothic axe. Good back spike here for trying to get through that armor, and a decent spear top. Is that it? No, it's not. I thought it was a full square spear top. That's a decent flat blade spear top to drive through the front of that armor, and it has those bandings. I talk about the bandings in our last episode. You can see them here too, as well as this chunk right here for blocking a sword. This chunk right here. Those bandings and whatnot are to prevent swords from cracking your shaft in half, as well as helping secure this on the shaft so it doesn't just... Because if these bandings weren't here, all the weight of this head would be fixed to this bit of wood right here. There's a good chance it would crack off when you hit something with it. These long bandings allow this weight to be spread through all this wood. Same here, as well as same here, all this wood. So that way when you hit something, you're less likely to crack your weapon. Because you've got that much weight behind that much leverage, you're semi-likely to just crack your weapon, and nobody wants that. Moving on to what I got on my body, we're going to start with the left shoulder. The Bardiche. Ooh. An Austrian weapon. This is the Dragoon's Bardiche, wielded by the Dragoon. The Dragoon were a musket-armed cavalrymen that would also be wielding these nasty things. Could you imagine riding your horse like the fucking winged hussar, just dunk, 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 dunk. You see an enemy coming up and you just whoosh. You're turning everybody that blade comes in contact with into multiple people. Now, what makes the Bardiche so famous is that the blade reconnects down here at the bottom, but it has this gap. All Bardiches have this gap, where the blade then reconnects down here at the bottom. The reason for that gap is so that they can, much like with a Zweihandler, say you're fighting down here, you need a bit more swift group. You can grab behind it and punch with it. I have actually killed people in this game by punching them in the face with this, like a giant bladed knuckle. Now, the Bardiche's blade hangs off the top. While that does allow for a stab against an unarmored opponent, I'm not going to try and stab plate mail. But you can see from the wobble of my wrist, that is some weight. Like if I grab way down here at the end, my guy can't even hold that up properly. It just keeps lagging down on him. Oh my god, look at that lag. That hits hard. That sunk into the table under its own weight. Like if I pull that up a little bit. Oh, I pulled it up too much. Darn. Anywho, definitely a nasty cleaving weapon that I can't wait to use here in a minute. On my other shoulder, I've got the knightly polearm, or poleaxe, the knightly poleaxe. So it has a flat axe blade. Not really my favorite design for an axe blade, a flat blade, because then you don't have any kind of mechanical advantage. All right, with curved blades like that guy, like that guy, like that guy, you're hitting with one point that spreads outward. You're hitting with this point that then spreads to those other points. This is no mechanical advantage coming down flat like that, but it does mean that the blade itself is a bit more durable. A really decent spike on top. That's a nice square spike. That is sturdy. That is not going to break when I hit somebody with it. These side spikes were more or less to keep the weapon from getting caught. It would bounce off on the sides. And this mallet back, oh, that is a gruesome looking mallet back. That if you were to bring that down on some plate mail, oh, they'd be feeling it in the morning. Beautiful four-sided banding going on for a decent amount with a wrist guard to deflect any blades that do happen to slide down that banding. They're going to get caught there so they don't slide down onto your fingers or slide down onto your weapon. Tiny little butt spike here. I don't know if it's enough to actually... Oh my god, it is. The butt spike is actually enough to let it just stand here. So yeah, now you can get a good look at that weapon. The mallet back, flat side blade, decent top spike. If this blade were more curved, this would easily be my favorite polearm in the game. Just because it is so well done. So well done. Moving on to my hips. On my left, I've got this knotted double-bladed axe. Again, I said double-bladed axes weren't uber common in history. The Templar axe here, you can see that has the double-bladed weights. But again, the Templar axe, just like this axe, typically a one-handed axe. Now, this one I chose to show off over the Templar axe because, one, I've used the Templar axe before, and two, because this axe reminds me more of a wood axe than an actual weapon of war, especially because there's no banding, all right? No banding on it, no protection like that. The handle's just a leather wrap. The blades are quite wide. This kind of axe would actually be used to split firewood and chop down small trees, like what we'd use a hatchet for. And that's why I wanted to show it off. A lot of times the Norse axes, if they couldn't take it to war, I could easily see, ouch, these being the same axe, and some Viking was like, well, I don't need this back head, and just cracked it off. So we'd have a one-sided axe. All right, you see how close those are in shape and make? Some Viking could just crack off this back blade, give it to a blacksmith, and say, hey, I need you to turn this blade into a seeks, so I've got a one-sided axe and a knife. You know, a good, whoa, I meant to do this, yeah, a good knife in my other hand and an axe in this one. But I wanted to show it off just for that ability to chop. And then what I like about a double-sided axe, you can come through, hit with that back. That's not going to do too much damage, but it is going to be enough to like hit, cause a cut, maybe stagger, allowing me to come back in with that, just boom. So just boom, 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 you know? On my other hip, you are not what I wanted. Are you what I wanted on my other hip? Oh, you are. I had throwing axes on my other hip. I'll keep it. Throwing axes were a very common weapon, especially by levies and other skirmishers. So we're gonna kick this pig with one enemy to start off, and I'm gonna use this guy and these guys. So there he is. I throw. Boom! Hits him right in the chest. Oh my god, I got him with that back axe. So he comes in, whoosh. Oh, see, this is the hard part about using an axe. Actually hitting with the head. Boom. Now, my depth perception plays against me. That's why I said 3 out of 5, or the 6 out of 10 I'd use an axe, because it can play against me very poorly. But unlike the game would show, I'm actually a pretty decent hand-to-hand fighter. My tracking doesn't really, show that very well. I could use an axe to a bit more terrifying efficiency than I can in this game. So whoosh. Boom. Done. Axe in the arm to buy me a moment, and then I planted one good strike right into his head. Just bam, right there. And see, with a double bit axe, say you're chopping your way through, 15, 16 guys in like leather armor, your axe blade is going to be understandably dulled after that. You can just flip it over, use the other side. Though I probably would not use a double bit axe on the battlefield, just for the sake of like using a one-sided axe and having that mallet end on the other end, something like this Gothic axe here. Having something like that to take on a plate mail wielding opponent just seems way better to me. Definitely something like this spike even, just seems better to me. That way you've got more versatility, because I'm all about that fucking versatility. All right, we're going to move on to what I've got on my shoulders. Starting with a bardiche. Oh, I can't wait to chop someone in half. All right, here he comes. I dodge. Boom. Oh my god. right in through the head, and I hit really close on the blade. I need to try to hit further back on the bell. I need to try to hit him while he's further away. There you are. So, boom! Oh my god, that was perfect! That was right on the bell, and it just took her arm clean off. Oh my god. Oh, you can see how it gets just gone. Oh, nasty, nasty bit of work. I'm gonna do one more, and this time I'm gonna be choked way up here, and I'm gonna block, and I'm gonna punch him in the face with it. So I, bam! And see, that knocked him down. That killed him. I blocked and just bam, right there, just boom. Oh, saw. That's nasty. I love it. All right, moving on to this insanely well-made halberd on my other shoulder. Cha-cha! Yeah, I'm gonna switch my hands on you.
Hello, motherfucker.
Whoa! You can't be sneaking up on me like that. Yeah. There we go. Oh, arm gone. Arm is gone. Is that lined up? Yeah. Wow, that just takes it right off. Oh. So yeah, that axe blade, quite effective. We're now gonna roll it over to the mallet end. Bam! Bonk! Yep, that mallet end's gonna tenderize a brain case. Oh, that is just gonna turn it into putty. I really wish I could do one enemy versus like one knight, so I could just really show how that would dent plate mail. Now we're gonna show off the thrust capability. So you got your thrust, and then you'd pull back, and then you'd swing. So you got your stab, and then boom! Oh my god, I planted that axe blade into her shoulder. How is she alive? Boom! So yeah, there you saw two nasty hits, one on each shoulder. That would have cracked her collarbone. She'd have never lifted her hand above her head. Never again. Alright, that's axes for you guys. Real basic weapon, real cheap, efficient weapon. And it's one of the other reasons why axes are in almost every single culture. Scandinavia and Norway and other Viking territories are famous for being the axe kings because of the Vikings. But the reason the Vikings used so many axes was because they didn't have a lot of steel for things like swords and plate mail and stuff like that. So they'd make axes because it's stupid, cheap, and efficient. They use axes. They use spears more than axes, but they had spears and axes, and seeks, which were the knives, because knives are easier to make than a sword. But every culture has an axe. Literally every culture has an axe. Even Japan has their own form of the polearm, which uses this long axe blade and an insanely well-designed widening spike here. You know what? I give Japan so much shit for their weapons. I'm just going to go ahead and use this one. Just to show you guys that I don't hate the weapons because they're bad. Every other culture's done it, and I think Japan's a bit overblown. So, boom. See, even if you hit with that blade, you can slice, you can stab, chunk, boom. Oh my god. So yeah, nothing against Japan's weaponry. They're all beautiful weapons. They all do their job really well. I just think that people give them some kind of godhood status that they don't quite deserve. Yeah, combining the spear and the axe into a single form of warfare. Boom, that's all it does. So yeah, that's some of that. I might get into Japanese weaponry later in history, especially things like the kunai, you know. when I do my throwing episode, expect a lot of kunai. Expect a lot of fucking shurikens. Oh, wow, that really didn't stick. There we go. Expect a lot of that. I didn't do their daggers because their dagger is no different than the huntsman's knife or the any other knife I showed. It's just a tool, a utility tool that sometimes had ceremonial purposes. Um, yeah, that's axes for you guys. Every culture has one. The colder regions are a lot more prevalent for their axes because, and this is my favorite part about it, a lot of people think barbarians of the north use the axe and are brutal. No, it's because if you live in the fucking cold, what do you need to survive? Fire. And how do you make fire? You burn wood. How do you get the wood? You chop it down. How do you chop it down? Oh, way to steal my thunder, game. The axe. you you chop down trees. So yeah, a lot of colder cultures had a ton of axes because they'd have to chop down a ton of trees just to stay alive. So naturally, they're very used to that axe's weight. They can swing an axe all day long. So they'd use it in war because it's what they have. Anywho, tomorrow's lesson is going to be a slightly different one. Tomorrow's lesson is going to be the throwing weapons that I've been talking about for a while. But we'll get to that when we get there. In my book of like the rankings of weapons, it's spear's the king of weapons. Under that is the club and the axe. Under that would be the swords, and then down there at the bottom would be things like the daggers. And the reason that list is orchestrated that way is how easy it is to create one of those weapons. Swords are definitely a weapon of luxury. Knives should be up there by spears, but a knife is very hard to fight with in a survival situation. So, spears, then axes and clubs. I'll see you all in the next one. Class dismissed.